I never imagined that at 65 years old, my life would take a turn I hadn't dared dream of. After years wrapped in the steady rhythm of routine, quiet dinners, faded photo frames, evenings spent with only the sound of my breathing, I made a decision. It wasn't bold, not exactly. It was more a surrender to the dull ache inside me, the quiet desperation for change. I booked a solo tour to Morocco. Not out of courage, not quite out of curiosity, but because I needed something. Anything. A crack in the wall I'd built around myself since widowhood had claimed my days. The airport was a blur of motion and chatter. Families huddled together, couples laughed over shared coffees, announcements echoed overhead. Yet amid the crowd I felt smaller than ever. Invisible. A ghost moving through a world that no longer saw me. That changed when I saw him. He was young, maybe in his 20s, helping an elderly couple with their bags. His movements were easy, unforced. His smile patient and genuine. There was no performance in his kindness. Just warmth. A living ember in a cold space. Later that evening, as I stood struggling with my suitcase in the hotel lobby, he appeared beside me like a page from a forgotten story. "Need a hand, ma'am?" he asked, voice calm with a hint of mischief. I hesitated. I had grown so used to doing everything on my own. But something in his presence, steady, unassuming, made it easy to nod. He told me his name was Tar. 25, from a place called Segal. He had the kind of ease people are rarely born with. The kind that makes silence feel full rather than empty. It wasn't just his looks, though he was striking in a quiet way. It was the way he held himself, like he belonged anywhere, yet demanded nothing from the space he occupied. The next morning, fate, or chance, placed us side by side on the tour bus. I had planned to read, to stay invisible. But Tar had other plans. He began a conversation that tiptoed into my heart before I could raise the usual walls. His questions weren't forced. They weren't coated with pity or curiosity. They were simply sincere. We spoke of books and cities we'd only read about, of the strange loudness of solitude. When I mentioned I was a retired librarian, he didn't dismiss it or laugh. Instead, he smiled and said, "My grandmother raised me with stories. She believed books could teach you how to love someone you haven't met yet." There was no flirtation, no hidden motive, just a quiet understanding. But something stirred in me, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't desire. It was something deeper. The feeling of being seen again. When the tour reached the edge of a dusty desert town, he turned to me and said, "Want to take a detour? Let's see what's beyond the guidebook." I should have said no. I barely knew him. But his tone wasn't pushy. His eyes weren't searching. They were simply offering. So I said yes. We took a shared taxi into a quieter village. The roads were worn, the buildings sun-washed and worn at the edges, yet alive with color. The hotel was modest, and we booked separate rooms. He didn't suggest otherwise. He carried my bag without asking and later invited me for a walk through the local market. As we walked, he told me about his grandmother, her wisdom, her humor, her grit. Found myself sharing too. About my husband's early passing. The slow quiet that followed me home each night like a second shadow. And he listened, truly listened. Not with sympathy but presence. That night, we dined on a rooftop terrace under a soft lantern-lit sky. I watched him talk, hands moving gently, eyes alight. And when he touched my hand mid-conversation, not romantically, just instinctively, I didn't pull away. I didn't want to. The next morning, the scent of spices drifted through my window. A knock at the door. Or, "Breakfast in the courtyard," he asked. We talked for hours. He told me he'd never known his parents. His grandmother taught him dignity, to treat everyone like they mattered. He admitted he often felt out of place among his peers. Too quiet, too thoughtful. And I saw myself in him. For the first time I admitted how grief had changed me. How I had stopped feeling like a woman and started becoming a memory in my own life. Later that day, as we sat by a shallow riverbank, he asked softly. Do you miss being touched? Not physically. I mean, emotionally. My breath caught. The question sliced through me. Yes, I whispered, more honestly than I had spoken in years. He didn't fill the silence. He just looked at me with such compassion that it felt like a balm on a long-neglected wound. That evening he offered to cook. We chopped vegetables together, and I laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in ages over my pitiful knife skills. As we ate, music from the village below drifted up through the terrace. Dance with me, he said. I laughed again. I haven't danced in decades. But he took my hand anyway. And we danced. Slowly, awkwardly, joyfully. He held me like I was something precious. And when the music ended, we didn't let go. His breath was near my cheek. His eyes locked on mine. Neither of us leaned in. It wasn't hesitation. It was reverence. You are beautiful, Margaret, he whispered. And something inside me broke open. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was aching for more, but because for the first time in years I felt like I mattered. Like I was alive. In the days that followed, we moved through that town like two verses in the same poem. He saw me, the little things no one ever noticed. How I paused before I spoke. How my fingers trembled when I was unsure. He met my silence with patience, my stories with awe. And somewhere in that rhythm I realized I was falling. Not into infatuation but into truth. You've lived, Margaret, he told me one morning in a garden. But I don't think you've ever been loved the way you deserve. I couldn't stop the tears. That night he grew quiet. I asked if something was wrong. I'm afraid of crossing a line, he said. But I can't deny what I feel. I reached for his hand. I'm afraid too. But I'm not confused. Later I touched his face and asked him to kiss me. He did. Gently. Reverently. With a grace I hadn't known in decades. Not lust. Not fantasy. Just a sacred human moment of connection. The next morning I expected shame. But none came. Only quiet joy. We shared tea as the sun rose, speaking little. I told him he made me feel peaceful. He smiled and said that peace looked good on me. But reality crept in, as it always does. This world of ours, this soft, sun-drenched bubble, was temporary. I had a return ticket. He had a life to return to. He sensed my shift. Let's not destroy something beautiful by rushing into fear, he said gently. Still I knew. People wouldn't understand. They'd see scandal where there was healing. Ridicule where there had been reverence. On our last day, we held hands longer than usual. Our smiles were tinged with ache. Words failed us. The moment was enough. At the airport, he looked at me with those steady eyes. You gave me something I didn't even know I needed. I tried to reply with something grand, something worthy of what we had shared. But all I could say was, you reminded me I was still alive. And that was the truth. I returned home to my quiet routines, but nothing felt the same. My house was still. My calendar empty. But something inside me had shifted. Friends noticed it. A new softness in my voice. A lightness in my step. I never spoke of Tar. They wouldn't understand. They hadn't felt what I had. Love doesn't come with rules. It doesn't care about age or geography. It arrives, unannounced, and sometimes only stays long enough to change everything. And one day, weeks later, I opened my mailbox to find a letter. Handwritten. Postmarked.